Yeah. Oh, well done, everyone. That's very good. We were rather worried we'd give a comfort break and everybody would be so excited by the last talk and so excited about our last speaker that there would be such a buzz, and there was, but you're all back, which is fantastic. And I feel like we've created one mind here today. I certainly can see friendships being forged. I can see a lot of conversations happening. And just a conversation that I had actually in the bar area proved to me that great minds think alike, because we've got our bookstall, and one of the books on the bookstall is Green with Envy, written by Richard Brooke. And it's pretty much, not word for word, but reflects a lot of the themes that Sandi was talking about in her presentation, commutarianism and all that stuff. And so the author, Richard Brooke, who's just over there, would like to present a complimentary copy of his book to Sandi. So Sandi, Richard.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, just to find everything in there, but hopefully you enjoy it.
You haven't
Thank you.
signed it.
You
signed it?
And he's going to sign it in front of a live audience. Da-da-da.
Thank you. I'll switch those off.
Thank you. Enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And of course what that is as we've just proven, is connections being formed. Richard's written a book, he's given it to Sandi after her presentation. I know that Sandi herself is writing her own book on Agenda 2030, which will be out soon. So again, thank you, Richard, for that and that very kind donation. And if you're interested, the book is in the reception area there. So just before I announce our final speaker of the day, there's one more piece of housekeeping that Rhonda and Jane have asked me to ask you lovely lot. And I am not fond of saying this, but I will say it. Sometimes you do need a man. And at the end, I'm sorry to be so stereotypical with that, it's not my nature, but we need some help stacking the chairs. And if a few men would help us at the end, just stacking the chairs at the back of the room, we will do it quicker. But we will do it quicker. It's a fact. Men are stronger biologically. XX, XY, we all know there's no other thing in the universe than that.
Hey!
So a bit of XY chromosome action at the end, helping us stack the chair, would be very much welcomed. So on to our last speaker of the day. And I haven't got any notes of this one because I really did want to speak from the heart on this. Andrew Bridgen will, I know, need no introduction to people here. And such a shining light in the establishment world, bringing to the Houses of Parliament, into the House of Commons, all of the issues that we wanted raised, and raised them so eloquently and so heartfeltly in the face of such opposition and such smearing and such detritus thrown at him, and never backed down, kept going. And on the last week that TNT was broadcasting, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, the last afternoon that TNT broadcast, and Andrew had been a regular guest on TNT, Global Radio, TNT, Lighting the Fuse for Freedom. I'm sure it'll be back. And Andrew was on the last afternoon, and I was on the show as James Freeman, the Freeman Report. James Freeman was here earlier. And I said to Andrew, because it's such an establishment matrix environment that he was operating in, as was I in the BBC, and quite often I doubted myself and think, well, maybe, did I get this wrong? Should I have stayed in that world with the pension and the security and the status and everything it brought, as same as being an MP? And I said to Andrew on air, did you ever regret the stance that you took? Because sometimes I'm a human being, I question myself. And what Andrew said really, really just inspired me once again on the personal journey that I've been on for the last 4 years. And Andrew said, it's not the things that you do that you regret, it's the things that you don't do. And I thought, yeah, you're right, mate, you're right. And I just want to say a big thank you, not only for that on a personal level, but on another personal, professional level. If you were here last year when Andrew was speaking downstairs in the chapel, he did something that very few people have managed to do with the BBC. The BBC is having to do it more and more these days, but it doesn't like doing it. But Andrew Bridgen got the BBC to apologise. And for putting misinformation on the screen when he was giving a presentation in the Commons, if I'm not mistaken. The BBC had to apologise. They were banged to rights. This man made them do it. Lo and behold, they're apologising to everybody left, right and centre pretty much every day now. But he got the ball rolling, so thank you for that one. So ladies and gentlemen, please, a massive, massive round of applause and appreciation.
Wow. Thank you very much for that introduction, Jemma, and thank you again to Stroud for inviting me. Almost 12 months since the last time I was here. I think we can all agree that quite a lot happened in the last 12 months. I'll be talking about what I think the main events of the last 12 months are in my life. I'll be showing a couple of short films and we'll do some Q&As. But we've already had two excellent speeches today, one from Charles Malet and one from Sandi Adams. And my takeaway on what Charles said, statutory instruments do have some parliamentary oversight. They have a committee made up of a sort of microcosm of so probably 12 MPs who make up the same sort of colour as the Parliament itself. They are selected by the Whip's office, so they will not select troublemakers to sit on statutory instruments. The Minister presents and the opposition supposedly opposes. A lot of statutory instruments there's no opposition whatsoever, and they don't even go to a vote. It is a travesty of parliamentary procedure. And what I would say as well about legislation and the 14 and a half years I was in Parliament is that a lot of legislation is written rather loosely for lots of reasons. One of the reasons is that one of the biggest group of people who end up being in Parliament are lawyers and barristers. And of course, if the law was written perfectly tightly so it could not be misunderstood, or was any argument about how it should be interpreted, there would be no job for lawyers. And I can assure you that one of the biggest lobby groups in Parliament is the lawyers, the legal profession, and any attempt whatsoever to ever diminish income stream for lawyers will be fiercely fought off in the House of Commons. I can remember, you remember that we brought in, for small amounts of argument on money, you could go to a small claims court. And of course, that amount of money was set at something ridiculously low, like a couple of £1,000s. Well, we tried, obviously, with inflation, you want to get that moved up, because you don't get many lawyers to £2,000 or £1,000 or anything less. And that was fought by the lawyers tremendously, because obviously it was going to take. And the fact is about legislation is that you look at it, and, of course, for a benevolent government who would never interpret the laws and the statutes in a bad way for the people, you could say, well, we'd never do that. We're very reasonable people. But the law is also written in a way, with a malevolent government, it could be interpreted a completely different way. And unfortunately, I think we've entered a stage where we do have malevolent government. We've had it for a while now, and that is a problem. And I'd like to thank Charles for bringing that to your attention. I've listened to Sandi speak on numerous occasions and spoken with her here last year, I think, in Stroud. And just the first point she made about the aim of the UN to, one of their declared aims for 2030, to end poverty. Well, of course, if you look at how poverty is calculated, I think anyone is classed as being in poverty if you're at 40% or less of the mean income of that country. Well, if we all have nothing, we'll all be equal, and there will be no poverty, I can assure you, mathematically. It's great to be back in Stroud. It's great to have an audience. I've noticed that it's only since I stopped being a member of Parliament that my speeches have an audience. So, we're going to play a very short video which I actually created last October, which gives you an idea of where I was, what I was thinking just before I spoke here last year, and then we'll take you through the year. Can we play the clip? I'm going to have a sit down. By the way, I had to go and move my car. The Church of England insisted I moved my car out of the front car park, and I'll tell you my relationship with the Church of England a bit later on as well.
Hello my friends, and thank you for joining me here at Bridgen on the Hill Church. As you know, this place is very special to me, and it's not unlike thousands of other beauty spots which dot across the landscape of our nation, which means so much to local people, grounding them in a deep sense of place that is both unique and universal. This church is most famous really for two things: the view you can see as far as Nottingham on a clear day, and the rare Saxon carvings. A monastery was built here when the Kingdom of Mercia was at the height of its powers, with some very beautiful carvings which we've retained today. In the 10th century, the Kingdom of Mercia and the other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms united to form a new nation, England, or Angelander, the land of the Angles, a nation that has stood proudly for centuries, weathering changes, celebrating victories, always moving together, moving forward. But now our nation stands on a precipice unfortunately of our own making. We have allowed globalists with no care for our nation, or for the nations of our brothers and sisters around the world, to bide their way into the command structures of our countries, and they seek now to transform the vibrant colours of our nations into one bland and uniform shade of grey. They poison our blood with untested medical products. They poison our bodies with food drenched in pesticides. They poison the minds of our children by spreading the nonsense that men can be women and women can be men. They poison our very freedom by trying to take away the energy that we heat our houses with, we light our way with, that's driven our progress throughout the centuries, and package it up and redistribute it to us as they see fit. And the politicians you elect to represent our nations assist them in their mission, which is nothing less than the murder of those nations. But things are changing fast. The control mechanisms of these globalists are actually a house of cards glued flimsily together by the compliance of the masses in ignorance of their true power. The overreach of COVID has slapped many of us, myself included, wide awake. Movements around the world are saying no and reaching back to their own nations, and realise if they rest on their own sovereignty, the house of cards can easily be pulled apart. As more people wake up, the more these billionaires and their pet bureaucrats realise that their power and their control is actually slipping away. Since that control is actually based in fear, it's their natural instinct to dial it up on us, to redouble their efforts. So you must learn, we must learn, to live our lives without fear. We need to laugh, to live and to love in the face of adversity. There is nothing to fear from a virus that kills at approximately the same rate as annual influenza. There's nothing to fear about climate change, because the climate has always changed. And as they shepherd us towards a third world war, how will fear help us if that nightmare comes to pass? The only thing you should be afraid of is a future planned by globalists, whose project requires your compliance and has no room for your links to special places like this. These people will not relinquish their power easily or lightly. We're going to be in for a bumpy ride. But when it's over and it will be over. We will be able to build a new nation, something better than we had before. The Saxon kings and queens and countless English men and women fought and died so you and I could live in a nation that was prosperous, safe and free. The globalists have a different plan for our future, but all we have to say is we will not comply. All we have to say is no. And their plans are dead and buried. Thank you very much for listening to me.
So this time last year I'd just had the first ever debate on excess deaths in any parliament in the world. It took me 26 attempts. I could only apply once a week during sitting weeks for the debate, and I was refused 26 times. So it actually took 9 months. And it wasn't until last summer, summer 23, that I produced a mini documentary about thalidomide, the true story, and uncovered the fact, which I was ignorant of, that although thalidomide was removed from prescription to the public in 1961, it was 1972 before the word thalidomide was ever mentioned in the chamber of the House of Commons. It was suppressed. And the judgment of the Strasbourg Court of Human Rights was that successive speakers of the House of Commons had deliberately suppressed all debate and questions on thalidomide for 11 years. I sent that video to Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, with the note through his staff, "We don't want history to repeat itself, do we, Lindsay?" And 2 weeks later I got a date for a debate. As Jemma said, the BBC were obviously plotting. They filmed and put out my speech live from the House of Commons, but they put, I think, 9 subtitles under my speech, which were completely inappropriate. It was talking about children's vaccines, MMR, being safe. Nothing I was talking about whatsoever. It was clearly a pre-planned attempt. They said it was the BBC had a duty to add context. Well, I mean, there was no context to their subtitles to anything I was saying. And yes, an Ofcom complaint resulted in an apology. Well, I think it was but it was probably the nearest I could ever get from the BBC of an apology, let's put it that way. Yeah, I'm not sure it was an apology. But bad news for the BBC, that week was the week that my TV licence came for renewal. And I thought I'd take the moral stance of taking my TVs off the wall and not paying the BBC TV licence anymore. And my life is far better for it. So I'd got the first debate on excess deaths. Very few members of Parliament had turned up to listen to it. There was a lot of cognitive dissonance in our Parliament. What I did next was I raised £22,000 and bought over some eminent scientists and doctors from the States and from the UK, people like Ryan Cole. I had Professor Angus Dalgleish. I got Steve Kirsch, the analyst, to come over, Pierre Corey, and we had a great debate. We got a committee room in Portcullis House. I invited every peer and every member of Parliament to come. It's a good job they didn't, because we wouldn't have had room to accommodate them. It was very interesting that the House of Parliament admin, I booked that room up months in advance. The biggest committee room in Portcullis House. At 12 hours notice, I was told we'd have to change rooms to a smaller room, which mysteriously happened every time I booked, the last 2 years, every time I booked a committee room. So we had an emergency room change, which threw us into a bit of mayhem, and we were into a smaller room. And all I'd asked for was, I got Peter McCullough was giving a presentation via Skype, and all we needed was TVs linked up and synced up so that the room, everyone could look at a television when we did that. Mysteriously, everything was fine with the event. I hosted it. We had a great event for 2 hours. But when we came to play the videos, the technicians had come in. The TVs had no buttons on them. They turned the sound down on the remote to 0 and then walked off and taken the remote. So, but that's just the glitches you do get in Parliament. But following that, I actually got 22 MPs to come to that and sat through 2 hours of it. David E. Martin, Dr. David E. Martin was particularly insightful, showing every MP the data of the patents for both the virus and the vaccine, which were flagged well in advance. And I pressured those MPs to support me, and I got a debate in Westminster Hall for 90 minutes on excess deaths, which again I spoke for half an hour of that, probably over half an hour of that. And that was a pivotal moment. The problem with that is that immediately after that debate, the Office of National Statistics, who maintained, how do we know what excess deaths are? Well, we have to have an estimate of what expected deaths are. And we've been using a formula for that for many, many years. Until January this year, when the ONS decided they would rebase the expected number of deaths, raising them by about 7%, taking away 2/3 of the excess deaths that we've been seeing for many years. Not only that, not only us been seeing the excess deaths, but mysteriously everywhere the novel COVID-19 vaccines were rolled out around the world, there were excess deaths, to the point where, on a trip to Norway, when I was speaking at a conference there, I met a professor from the Western Norwegian University of Institute of Science and Technology, who'd written a paper showing the correlation between, for every 1% of your population that were vaccinated with COVID-19 novel vaccines in 2021, there was a 0.1% corresponding increase in mortality in 2022. And I said to him, when are you going to, I actually got to meet this great man and said to him, when are you going to get it peer reviewed? And he laughed at me. And he said, I don't think you understand, Andrew. He said, everyone's so scared of this paper because they know the maths is correct. No one is going to peer review it because they'll just lose their funding like I'm going to. And that is where we've got to, is where the science is concerned. So the ONS, and by the way, it's just another coincidence that in 2022, the year before, the Office of National Statistics moved premises, and they moved into the Home Office in Marsham Street, right? Why would they want to do that? It's under complete control. They knew how important that would be. So I spoke then, and immediately then put back in, because I think the other speakers in the debate on excess deaths only got like 4 or 5 minutes at least, if that, to speak, given the demand. An issue that affected every community, every constituency, from one end of the country to the other, and the turnout, driven by public opinion on this, had increased in the Westminster Hall debate. So I immediately put in for a 3-hour debate in the main chamber, which is the best we can get. Under parliamentary rules, you can't keep having debates with the same title. You can't keep having debates, excess deaths. So we had to change the title of the 3-hour debate to the pandemic response and excess deaths, which is fine. And we got that debate eventually. We were given it in April, a 3-hour debate. And I don't know if you've seen any of the video of that, but the public gallery was absolutely rammed. And there were hundreds of people in Central Lobby who couldn't get in there. I went and spoke to them in Parliament Square after that debate. And that is the only time where, through the bulletproof glass, the cheering of the public could be heard loudly in the chamber. And that was a totemic moment. And I do like seeing the horror and fear on the front benches when the public are speaking, letting them know their approval. It is unprecedented, as was really the Madam Deputy Speaker's threat to clear the public gallery if the clapping didn't stop. I wonder whose side she was on. So we aired all of these, but I've come to the conclusion that we can't stop these vaccines, not through Parliament. There was a paper out only a few weeks ago which said that in a survey of 1.7 million children, there was no myocarditis or pericarditis found in any of the children in that sample who were unvaccinated. It is totally a condition of the vaccinated. And that one piece of evidence alone, in a sane world where we were following scientific method and medical ethics, that would have stopped the rollout of these vaccines. Have we had an effect? Well, I spoke out in December 2022 when it was clear that the Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency was seeking to gain approval to push the lower age limit for COVID-19 vaccines down to 6 months. Children under 5. And I went, I'm not politically naive. I've been an MP for quite a while. I knew there'd be a big backlash against me for speaking out and raising concerns, going against the narrative. So I went to get colleagues. I went to get colleagues to help me. I went to the Brexiteers, the ones who I'd campaigned with before against government policy, and we'd won. And I'm not going to name names at this time, but I mean, they will have to be named eventually. And so many of them said to me, yeah. And one of them said, I'm with you, Andrew, really. I've had 2 Pfizers, went down to the gym, had 2 micro heart attacks, had to go to hospital. The doctor said if I wasn't as fit as I was, I'd be dead. But I'm not speaking out on this. Another one came to me and told me that you're right, you are right on these vaccines, they're dangerous. My sister's just taken one, and now she's paralysed from the neck down. And I said, well, what's going on? I mean, you've got to speak out. Now you know, you've got to speak out. She said, well, my sister works for the NHS, and you know what people, how vindictive they are. She doesn't want any publicity around it. I said, well, the fact is, you know. You don't have to mention your sister. It could be from a constituent. There's enough of it about. And she just turned on her heels and said, I'm not speaking out, and walked off and left me. And worse than that, I mean, I spoke to another very senior MP whose sister, I knew his sister had to go to hospital with chest pains after 2 Pfizer jabs because her bestie had told me. And I went to him and I thought, he's going to be on board. And he listened to me for an hour and a half talk about my concerns about the vaccines, my concerns about midazolam and morphine, NG163, and the euthanization of vulnerable LD in hospital to create the first wave of COVID deaths. He listened to that for an hour and a half, and at the end, he said to me, Andrew, there is currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may well be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world with all the personal risk for you that will entail. And at that point, I said, I think this meeting's over, really. Haven't really got anything left to talk about, have we? And that's when they threw me out of the Conservative Party. And I have become completely disillusioned with the party system, quite honestly. It is completely corrupted. We're supposed to work for you. I came into politics to work and represent the people in North West Leicestershire, my home. There is none of that in Parliament. In Parliament, you get on in politics by playing the political game, which means you do what's good for your party, not what's good for your people. And that's going to have to change. And it's not what we're seeing in our Parliament. We're not any worse or any better than any of the parliaments, so-called parliaments of the democracies around the world. Here, these so-called democracies are not that, and they're all in lockstep. I think I did upset my colleagues in the House of Commons when I said in January 2023 that we're very fortunate in the UK because we have some of the very best politicians that money can buy. For 2 years in Parliament, the last 2 years before the election, I was ostracised. I ate every meal on my own. And people said, you're all isolated, Andrew. You speak in the chamber on your own. Nobody wants to talk to you in Parliament. And that was not true, ladies and gentlemen, because in our Parliament there are about 4,000 real people. They're the cooks and the cleaners, the security guards, the clerks, the policemen. And when there was no one else in the corridor or no one else in the room, they would always come up to me and say, we're all praying for you, Andrew. And that's what kept me going. Why did Rishi Sunak call that election, that snap election, when the Conservatives were 20 points behind Labour? I'll explain to you why. There was a number of reasons why he called that election. And it wasn't a race between the blue and the red team. It was a baton handover between the Uni Party. Because on all the big things, there is complete agreement across the parties, whether it's net zero, the pandemic response, the WHO treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations, the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East. Very, very few dissenting voices at all on any of those issues. But things that are really going to affect and are affecting our lives and the lives of the next generation to come. So why did Rishi? First of all, I have my spies in the Ministry of Defence. Rishi had told all the generals and the admirals and the air vice marshals that he didn't want to be a wartime prime minister. And we are getting dragged into a war, and they're not really bothered. It'll be against Russia, China, Iran, and probably India will be on that block as well. Yeah. And Rishi doesn't want it. Rishi doesn't want it. And he told the generals that he wanted out. The second was that he was claiming that his inflation busting plans had worked and inflation was down to 2%. Well, if his plan was working, why didn't he wait a bit longer and let us demonstrate it was working a bit more? Because inflation peaked back up again last month and it's going to go up because he knew that was as good as it was going to get before he had to call the election by January 25. Because inflation was going to go back up because the government has done such ridiculous things with farming. When we only produce 55% of the food that we consume in this country, and you might have noticed we seem to keep accumulating more mouths to feed in this country. Yeah, we aren't getting any more farmland, we're getting less of it. So taking 20% of our farmland food production out, and we only produce half of what the food we need in this country, especially at a time when they keep telling us we're going to be at war with Russia in the next 5 years. There's going to be a war, or China, or both of them. Yeah. And that makes sense, doesn't it, when we just shut 2 weeks ago the last steelworks that can make weapons-grade steel. You would do that, wouldn't you? I mean, it's just sensible. It's just sensible. You would do that and stop yourself producing food. Well, food inflation is going to go up again. I'm told from farmers that the crop yields are down about 15%. So that's going to be highly inflationary. And any sort of instability in the Middle East leads to energy prices going up. So he knew that that was as good as it was going to get that summer as far as the interest rates were going to be taken. The other thing was the Rwanda bill. The Rwanda bill, to deal with and dissuade the illegal migrants from coming across the channel, was only ever for public consumption. Any MP who'd been in Parliament more than 5 minutes knew that the legislation wasn't strong enough, unless we left the European Convention of Human Rights and probably the Convention on Refugees. All it was going to be, guess what? It's going to be a feeding frenzy for the lawyers. He knew, because we told him 18 months ago, it's another thing, the Rwanda bill, it ain't going to fly. You and I got more chance of going to Rwanda than any illegal migrants, I can assure you. And he knew that. And if he waited until November to call the election, it'd have been evident that no one's going to Rwanda. No one's going to Rwanda. And the other reason was that the narrative of safe and effective vaccines, something that all the political class had put their weight behind. In fact, the Labour Party were keener on lockdowns. They wanted more lockdowns. They wanted more mandates. That was unravelling, and it's continued to unravel, and it will unravel for sure this winter. And neither of the major parties wanted to risk that happening before a general election. So we had to have a general election. In 2019, I was first elected in North West Leicestershire in 2010 in a seat that David Cameron told me I'd never win, and he wouldn't give me any money from the Conservative Party. I used my own money and got the second biggest swing in the country against Labour. My majority had gone up at every election, even in 2017 when Theresa May, or we should call her Treason May, was Prime Minister and called a snap election so she could keep us effectively in the EU and lost her majority. My majority went up by 2,500. So my majority was 7,500 in 2010. It went up to 11,200 in 2015. In the 2017 election, it went up to 13,300. And in 2019, having led Brexit for the East Midlands, the Get Brexit Done, which is a bit of a joke really, election in 2019, I got 63% of all the votes in North West Leicestershire and a majority of 20,400. At the election in this year, despite having more volunteers on the ground and putting more leaflets out and having a recognition from the voters on the doorstep by name of 95%, I apparently got 3% of the votes. Could we play my election address that I sent out to all my people? Hello, my friends. This election is not about Conservative or Labour. It's not about right or left. It's about right or wrong. To go to war with your own government over HS2 when you know the project will harm your people, that is right. So that's what I did. To believe Michael and Susan Rudkin, the former Ibstock sub-postmaster, and his wife, who brought me an unlikely tale of a dodgy computer system framing Susan for theft. To fight for Susan for 14 years in the face of a government cover-up and media disinterest. That's right. So that's what I did. To ignore the Horizon scandal out of fear of taking on Fujitsu, as many MPs and the media did, that's wrong. To listen to the majority of your people when they say they want out of the European Union and to campaign for it on their behalf. To do so even when it puts you in a minority in Parliament and at odds with your own party leadership. That's right. So that's what I did. To work like a sneak behind the scenes to frustrate the Brexit vote, as many MPs and civil servants have done, That's wrong. My determination to do right by the people of North West Leicestershire has left me isolated and, like so many of you, politically homeless. Because to win the game of politics, you must do what's right for your party, not your voters. And that's wrong. But if I had my time again, I would not change a thing. Because after 14 years in office, I see economic growth in North West Leicestershire, ranking amongst the highest in the country. I see 1.2 jobs for everyone of working age, which keeps wages going up. We live in the only part of Leicestershire and Rutland where salaries are above the UK average. We build 800 houses a year, which keeps the prices manageable. Good salaries, economic growth, and decent housing at a price within reach. It really isn't hard. Here in North West Leicestershire, you have these things, and North West Leicestershire scores amongst the highest in the Midlands on the Happiness Index. You do not have these things by accident. You have them because I fought for them. With my background in business, I understand what prosperity is and how to get it. Elect someone else whose first loyalty is to a party based in London, not to you, and you will see these prizes disappear. To commit to a defence union with the European Union, as Labour has done, that's wrong. To promise billions of dollars for a war in Ukraine whilst our public services crumble, that's wrong. To do nothing to bring peace negotiations in that war is wrong. To campaign for a second referendum because you don't like the first result, as Keir Starmer did, that's wrong. To enforce immigration law against people landing illegally on the beaches of Kent and to deport them for their crimes, that would be right. To house these criminals at your expense, while some British veterans and families have no place to call home, is wrong. To teach primary school children that there are more than two sexes, that's wrong. To try and get a bill through Parliament to stop this, as I did, is right. Only a tiny minority would argue otherwise, but politicians from both main parties voted my bill down. And that's wrong. For decades you've been warned that the climate is changing and the world is about to end. This is wrong. The climate has always changed. The world is still turning. The Labour Party and the Conservatives are marching arm in arm towards disaster that is net zero. The data used to justify these insane economic plans doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny. China, India, Russia and others are opening new coal-fired power stations every week. We continue to sacrifice our economic well-being on the altar of this fraud. This is wrong. Re-elect me and I will continue to call this madness out. Nobody else on the ballot paper can. Their parties have surrendered to this cult. When members of the public began to contact me to say that they had been harmed by COVID-19 vaccines, I listened. Just like I listened to Michael Rudkin. Just like I listened to the people of Measham who were worried about HS2. I listened, I researched, I found there were questions to be asked, and I asked them. That's all I did. That is what an MP should do. And that is right. Many other former members of Parliament received similar pleas for help. But they buried their heads in the sand as far as they would go, pulling them out only to attack me when I spoke. That's deeply, deeply wrong. The idea that pharmaceutical companies would cut corners with their safety is hardly revolutionary. All I've ever said is that these questions should be asked and should be answered. Enforce immigration law, protect children from militant transgenderism, call time on net zero, fight the power grab by the WHO, the World Health Organization, and expose vaccine harms. These are my principles. You already know exactly who I am. You also know that on these matters, the political class speaks as one and is forbidden by their parties to ask questions. When the chorus is singing the same tired song, it's the soloist who's remembered. Something once placed on the parliamentary record can never, ever be erased. If you re-elect me, I will be the only member of Parliament whose speech is truly free. My allegiance is to you. My questions and my votes in the House will be for you. I've stood up for you in Parliament for 14 years. Now I'm asking you to stand with me, and let's make the 4th of July our Independence Day. Thank you very much for listening to me. Mysteriously, every time I go outside my home in northwest Leicestershire, when I go and fill my car up with fuel, or I go to the supermarket, whether I go to the coffee shop, people come up to me and say, I voted for you like I always did, Andrew. What happened? There are a lot of anomalies in northwest Leicestershire, starting over 12 months ago, when the whole of the elections department in the local council resigned on the same day and were replaced by a whole new team. How often does that happen? None of them had left ever before. I spoke to the chief executive, who is obviously the returning officer, and she's quite new as well, only 3 years in the job. And I said to her, Alison, why has everyone left the elections department all en masse? And her answer to me was, it was the right time for them to move on. And I said, and what does that mean? She did not elaborate what that meant. So we had all that, and I'd agreed with the council as part of the economic redevelopment of Colville. The council offices were rather large and a 70s tack on to a listed building, and we said that we'd bulldoze the council building. I know everyone wants to do that. Bulldoze the council building, leave the listed building as the registry office, move all the public-facing services into empty retail units in the Beaver Centre, the shopping centre in Colville, and move the back office functions of the council into office blocks that the council already owns on the industrial estate. Very sensible. What I found out is that they left the elections department, the new elections department, working on their own in the old building for months and months and months unsupervised before the election. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? When we got to the count, and bear in mind that the constituency, we'd had boundary changes, but all that happened was because we've built so many houses over the year, North West Leicestershire House population was far too high. People wanted to live in North West Leicestershire. We'd taken what was, when I was elected, the poorest constituency in Leicestershire, and it's taken us 9 years to create it into the richest constituency, with the highest economic growth in the country, and the only part of the county with above average UK salaries and household income. At the same time, because we'd built such good quality and so many houses, we were keeping house prices at 30% less than the UK average. Well, average household income's higher than UK average house cost 30% less than UK average. That is the sweet spot, and that's why North West Leicestershire was the happiest place to live in the Midlands, and 1.2 jobs for everyone of working age in the constituency. So we had everything running for us. Northwest Leicestershire. What do we know about the exit poll? Well, 3 weeks after the election, I was contacted by a constituent who gave me some information. Northwest Leicestershire was going to have an exit poll run by Ipsos Mori. They'd recruited all the people, they'd done the surveys, they knew where they were going to go, they'd recce the polling station, everyone was recruited. And I found out that Ipsos Mori was struggling for that exit poll to get enough people to man all those polling stations on the night or on the day. So they've got to be there from 7 in the morning till 10 at night, till the polls close, and they actually ask every fourth person who comes out which way they voted. They don't ask everybody, ask every fourth person. And the team that were due to do it in Northwest Leicestershire were all sorted. So despite the problems that Ipsos Mori had got around the country, and I was told that they were told 2 weeks before the election to stand down and not poll Northwest Leicestershire because they didn't want to poll it, despite the fact they hadn't got enough people to run them all over the country. And the other thing is, not only, every time I go out of the house, people are still talking about it in Northwest Leicestershire. It's fair to say that the establishment and the mainstream media fairly despise me. I'm a pain in the backside to them, and I'm going to be a bit more of a pain, which I'll explain about you shortly. If I'd really been humiliated by my own electorate, the people I've represented for 14 years, four elections, the people I've grown up with, that would have been in the news. Andrew Bridgen, the conspiracy theorist, humiliated. Yeah. Not one breath of it in the news anywhere. Almost as if it didn't happen. As if it never happened. No one wants to talk about it because people in Northwest Leicestershire know that that result did not really match what was on the ground. And if we have a whistleblower come forward, I mean, at the count, they said it was going to take up to 4 hours to bring the ballot boxes in. We've always got them in 40 minutes before, and the constituency got about 15% smaller because I'd actually lost wards. So I'd kept everything, but lost a couple of big wards. One of them was a big rural ward at the south end of the constituency. So we should have got the ballot boxes in even faster than normal, but it wasn't like that. And they knew. And also, I've been to a lot of elections and referendums, very important ones, probably 20. I've been at those counts. You can tell from the body language, you know when people are really nervous. The elections team was so nervous, I thought they were standing for election, not me. So there are matters there to be dealt with, but we are where we are. We now have a Labour government, voted in by probably less than 20% of the public who may have voted Labour. Our government, Mr Starmer said before the election he was going to cut average household energy bills by £400. He accused the Conservative government of planning to cut pensioners' winter fuel allowance. Well, we had a situation where we had a Conservative government who were in power for 5 years with the biggest majority I'd seen since I've been in Parliament, who did nothing Conservative. And who would have thought we'd have a Labour government getting in with the biggest majority probably any of us have seen in our lifetimes of any government. And the first thing they do is take away pensioners' winter fuel allowance at the same time as allowing energy companies to put their prices up on the 1st of October, just gone, by 9%. Maybe that's what it's going to take for people to realise that all of these parties, the red horse, the blue horse, the yellow horse, they're all in the same stable. Does anybody really think that Keir Starmer is making policy and running this country? And has any of you ever realised, thought, I mean, how bad people who get to the top in politics really are. And it's not even just in our country, is it? It's across the world. How can this be that such inept people with apparently so little either charisma or care for the people they're due to represent? I mean, basically, you've just got to be a good liar, haven't you? Just got to be a good liar, and you've got to be willing to say whatever you're told to say. Well, I think it's becoming pretty apparent to the people that whatever goes on in Parliament and whoever you vote for, they are not representing your best interests. It is an absolute shocker, and I was there for a lot of years before I realised what was going on. But things are moving fast now. Looking forward, and this is, you're going to have a totemic election in America on the 5th of November. We're going to see that. I was very encouraged when Robert Kennedy Jr. chucked in with Trump. I've spoken to Robert Kennedy on a number of occasions, and he actually endorsed me in North West Leicestershire on my leaflets, a US presidential candidate. It's not bad. And I always wanted him to, he wasn't going to win on his own. He's a very, very brave man who's standing up against massive corporations at huge risk to himself. And let's face it, I mean, you know, they've tried to assassinate Trump twice. They are going to try again. They're desperate. I mean, I don't know if you sort of, Trump is now apparently 10 points ahead of Kamala Harris. I don't know if you saw what she'd been doing the last few days, but I mean, having aid for North Carolina put on an aeroplane so you can pose for a TV interview when it's not even going to North Carolina and has to be taken back off the plane again, it isn't going to go down well with people. This is how they think about you. You know, going into an event like this and claiming you're speaking to the people and answering their questions, and then the camera pans around and it sees that you're reading off a teleprompter, it isn't good. That isn't good. Bad, bad, bad. Very bad. And this is the best, you know, one of the best people they can have as a candidate to be President of the United States of America, a country of 330 million people, the world's greatest superpower. That's the best we can do. It's absolutely, absolutely shocking. And even with the help and cooperation of a partisan media in America, when it comes out that they're editing her interviews and allowing her to re-answer questions and put those into the broadcast, I mean, again, that's just not a good look. So I think what you're going to see now is the media around the world are going to have to start considering with increasing seriousness that there could well be a probability, unless they try and assassinate him again, and I'm not ruling out that they will, I think they may well do just before the election to stop it, Trump and Kennedy in the White House, J.D. Vance as well, obviously. And bear in mind where they've got with their narratives about the vaccines, about net zero, about everything else. They're going to have to move their position. Because if Kennedy gets in, he's going to rip through healthcare in America. He's going to rip through big pharma. He's going to try and sort out this super processed food that's leading to an obesity and diabetes crisis in their country, where now a third of their children have got pre-diabetes, something they didn't have at all 30 years ago. Well, there's cause and effect of all of this. And they're going to have to start moving their position, but they're also desperate to stop this election. And I wouldn't put anything past them, even to the point of pushing us over the brink into a war, a major war. And things are pretty bad. And I did say it's going to be a bumpy ride. It's going to be a bumpy ride, and it's going to be extremely bumpy for the next 4 weeks, I can promise you. But what you've got to do, we've got to keep our spirits up and remember that the worse it gets, the nearer we are to the end. And there will be an end to this. And we think, you know, what are we? We're just we're just drops in the ocean, just a few individuals. We're more than that. We're all linked together anyway. We're the ocean in one drop. So, we're going to be in for a bumpy ride for the next 4 weeks. Massive stakes. But for the first time with the globalists, we've always been, if it's a game of poker, we've always been in. We were always on the table. We're always the chips. But they're all in now. And the first time on the turn of the cards of fate over the next few months, we can save humanity. And I think we're going to do it. Thank you. All right.
Stand up again, my darling. Come on, Andrew Bridgen, ladies and gentlemen.
It's really nice actually to be in a company of awake people, because you know, when I'm out, I just get the impression I'm giving off this vibe, which, you know, that the government don't really like us. They probably hate us, and they're exposing us to life challenging risks all the time deliberately, and it just tends to annoy a few people having that vibe around me.
Well, that vibe's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, there's no doubt about that. And that's largely due to you being so brave, standing up in the heart of our establishment and bringing these issues to public attention. And I just think that, for me personally, the most rousing bit of your story, and it's such a great story, is the bit where you were talking about the cheers from the public gallery, the sound from outside in the street, and the look of horror in the chamber, where they realise that the tide is turning against them and that tide will never go back out. It will never go back out.
One thing is, the people who wake up, I mean, there's no broadcast from Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak that's going to put you back to sleep again, is there? It's a one-way street.
We are very near the end of the day, but I think it's only fair, given what Andrew has been talking about. I mean, we will open up, we'll just take a couple of questions, I think. But that will be it, and I know questions spark questions, and other people think, oh, I want to ask this and I want to ask that, but if you really have got something pertinent and you really do want to ask Andrew something, we've got a few minutes to take a couple of questions from the floor, and they would be right at the back. Thank you. I'll come to you.
Thank you for that wonderful speech, Andrew. Obviously, it's on everyone's mind, the election in America, and how important it is for the world. But we know how they play. What is your views if he doesn't get in?
I think if there was a Rasmussen survey in July, and it said that 62% of Americans were concerned about election interference in the presidential election. My personal view on the 2020 election is that there was severe election interference. I called it at the time. I think the world could go into a time of pretty much meltdown. I think I can see a situation where will have certain states will secede from the Union if they feel that there's been an unfair election again, or if anything happens to Trump. They might be working, God forbid, on the third time lucky on the assassination attempts. They are desperate now. They are desperate. Okay, next question. Well, under legislation, you only have 21 days to challenge an election result to overturn it. 21 days from the election, that is the law. However, we've asked in a national article that was in the Conservative Woman, Sally Beck came and investigated, spoke to the council and other parties, and there is an email on there. We have had a few interesting emails come in, and if we get the right whistleblower, I mean, a lot of people would have to have been involved in something like that. I should feel flattered.
Yeah.
I should feel flattered. But I would tell you, and I can't talk about this for legal reasons now, soon I'll be able to tell you all the things they've done to me since the election, which are worse than anything they've ever done to me before the election. They haven't stopped attacking me. The establishment have really gone for me, to the point where I'm fighting bankruptcy on the 24th of October. I'm in a bankruptcy court on the 24th of October. But there's a lot of other worse things they've done to me, worse than that, in the last few months. So they're not giving up. There's only one reason they're doing this, is they don't like me speaking out, they don't like what I'm saying, they don't like what I stand for. And more importantly, if they did rig that election, and I think there's a lot of evidence that they did, and that's the evidence I'm finding on the ground, they have to try and break the people away from me, because the people of North West Leicestershire stood with me, not with them. And when this breaks, and whatever happens about the vaccines, whatever happens, I think it's coming out this winter. They're not going to get the 20 years. They're not going to get the 20 months from when they threatened me. That's going to come out. Which politicians you're going to have standing in this country? Who's left? Right? Who do you want? Someone who's willing to stand up for you, or the people who, and I know all their names, the ones who knew and were quite happy to carry on jabbing babies with toxic substances when they knew, and they knew what it had done to them and their own family. The system we've got is broken. It's broken. And we cannot carry on, and we can't mend it. We need to move to direct democracy. And if I had my way, we need to get rid of the House of Lords. They've done nothing whatsoever to protect the public interest. We need to halve the number of MPs and pay them more, but no external interest whatsoever while you're an MP. Halve the number. We don't need any more than that. And the second chamber needs to be the people, the same as the system in Switzerland, where we produce referendums every 3 months, and you are the people who are in charge. You will have a referendum on all the laws. You'll probably vote for 10 laws at one time. You can yes, no, and if you're the second chamber. Democracy comes from the old Greek. Demos is the people and kratos is the power. How powerful do you feel? This system will bring it back to you, and that's what we're going to have to get to, because when we've sorted this out, this horrendous situation the world's got into, and the crimes against humanity that have been committed against people across the globe, we must have a system which prevents that from ever happening again. Okay, thank you very much. All right.
I think what a wonderful place to end that on, what a wonderful message of hope, change and positivity, which is how we started today, I think, and how we've ended it. And boy, hasn't the time gone quickly. What do they say? Time flies. Your vibration speeds up when you're having fun. That's when you know you're in the right place. And like when you're not, like when I was at the BBC, the hands of the clock literally used to go backwards sometimes. I used to think, oh, God's sake, let me out of it. But thankfully, that's not been the case today. So it has been a wonderful day. One of our speakers has obviously departed, Charles Malet, but energy travels. So let's give a big round of applause for Charles, Sandi Adams, Andrew Bridgen, our wonderful speakers.